one of the issues we're running on is transparency, and not only just transparency, but really making sure that residents understand how the town works.
Morris Plains needs to grow, but in the right direction.
You both have a very big stake in this town with young kids. You have a lot of energy. You've got insights.
Hello, everybody. Bill Houston, Tyler Prontier here. HP for MP. Today, Tyler and I are sitting down and we're talking with John Verga. We felt that in kind of everything that's going on in town with the buildings that are happening and all that kind of stuff.
Lots of land use issues.
Lots of land use issues. Yeah, there's some interest in the planning board and the zoning board and kind of what goes on those boards. And so Tyler and I figured we'd just give the people out there just an idea of how these meetings work, right, and the process behind them. And I'll start just because I've been to a lot of these meetings over the last year and a half, 2 years or so, and just understanding how they all work. So the planning board has the responsibility of looking at the applications that come in front of them, and then they have to vote on whether or not those applications meet the letter of the law, right? To put it,
if it's an approved use, right?
Exactly, approved use. And where those approved uses come from are the council, right? The council passes ordinances, and those ordinances dictate the
who can apply. Exactly. And what could fit a certain space.
Exactly. So it's more of a judicial branch, if you want to look at it that way. And the like I said, they just have to do what's in front of them, which is sometimes hard to understand, right? Especially with something that's as polarizing maybe as Acme was last year or this year, McDonald's or something else, right? Hard to understand why they would look at it that way, but that is their ultimate responsibility in doing so. Now, that's not to say that they can't look at it from a citizen point of view. I think that is also important, that they need to look at it that way. But it definitely makes it interesting when we're reviewing things like this. Certainly, a lot of people have showed up, right? They showed up last year to the Acme meeting. They're showing up for the McDonald's.
Yeah, great responses at the planning board for the McDonald's meetings. And just to jump in quick, up until I learned how the process worked from people like John, or speaking with Joan and Nancy, is similar. Trying to go to as many council meetings as I can, planning board meetings. I didn't, again, till I learned, I didn't understand how things worked. So you basically just sort of see something in action, and it piqued my interest. So the more I learned, I did think it was really interesting. And, one of the reasons we're having John on, as Bill was saying, is because one of the issues we're running on is transparency. And not only just transparency, but really making sure that residents understand how the town works, and how a hair salon comes downtown, or how a warehouse gets built. And, not only that, but what was in place that it could be there. And, there's so many people in town that have this knowledge, that have explained it to Bill and Bill and I have started to be able to learn firsthand from being at the meetings. So we're excited to have John here today, because not only has he lived in town for a long time, he was on the planning board. How long were you? And so to welcome John.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm just thrilled to be part of your podcast, guys. I think this is a great forum to get some of what you're really all about out there, so people get to know and understand how engaged you are and your understanding of the issue. So first, I'm just thrilled to be here and join the conversation. So, my wife and I, Nancy and I, moved to town in '98, so we've been in town over 25 years. We raised 4 kids. They all went through they all went through Borough. And then 2 of our kids went to Morristown, and 3 of our kids went to Morristown, rather, and then 1 went to Seton Hall Prep. So, we've loved Morris Plains. We've just loved everything about, raising our kids here. Morris Plains was like perfect every step of the way. It was perfect when they were little kids and we could go to the pool, different events in town. It was walkable. And then when they got to be teenagers, they could walk down to TFAB right, on their own, or go down and go to Dunkin' Donuts. Then when they got a little older, they could start taking the train into Morristown. Before Uber, that was a big deal. My oldest son, like they would go to, when he was legal drinking age, they would take the train for like $2 into Morristown, and you can go to the bars down there and take the train home.
One stop.
One
stop down. Yeah.
I wish it were still $2 to take the train.
Yeah, right. And Uber's good, but it is expensive. Mm-hmm. And then it worked for me well in my business and my career. I was a sales executive for United Healthcare. My territory was New Jersey for all brokers who represented customers that were in the state of New Jersey. I had some tri-state responsibilities, so I'd be into the city on quite a number of occasions. So Morris Plains has fit every step of the way for our family. So as Tyler mentioned, I was on the planning board. Started back in, I think, 2018. Spent about 5 years on the planning board. And, it was a real passion of mine. I had minored in college at the time in urban and regional planning. So this was always a little something that I wanted to do. Changed my degree to a business degree. And, I've always been intrigued by what makes a town tick. Right. Mm-hmm. And when we moved to Morris Plains in 1998, there was a lot of stuff going on in Morristown. Mm-hmm. And it was a real tipping point for Morristown. There were housing issues. There were a lot of issues. People were like, you're going there. Well, you're moving to Morristown. How good is that high school? All these questions. And it was a pivot moment for Morristown. And the leadership at that time, went in and did a lot with apartments. And, that has helped, make Morristown what it is. Right. So it was pretty interesting to see all that develop in our backyard. Mm-hmm. So, and I see other towns along train lines, and I see where people, are actively engaged in different towns. And, I think we have a great downtown, and we have all the ingredients to keep it going and be even better. So, but I think the planning board, it's sort of like oxygen or air or breathing, right? Like people just do it and you have it. And then it's like when you don't have air, it becomes a problem. So all of a sudden the planning board is going along, and all of a sudden something comes up like a warehouse or Mon or Acme, which was actually with the zoning board, or the McDonald's. And everyone starts to be like, hey, what's going on here? And it's hard for people to get your arms around sometimes, because unless you're at every meeting, it is, and unless you're like a professional in municipal land use, a lot of it is hard to understand. So, I think Tyler put it well as, it's a judicial proceeding when you get down to the planning board, right? And the real goal of the planning board in any town is to administer the New Jersey municipal land use law, right? Mm-hmm. So you can imagine throughout the years how if there was no standard, what could happen. You'd have discrimination against certain, religions. Someone wants to put a church in town, and we're like, well, we don't like your religion, you're not going to come to this town, or we don't like your business. So the land use is all about fairness, and it's fairness for residents and for, quite frankly, the business community, right? Because if a business person buys a property, they have a right to develop the land in a certain way. And if there were no standards, it would be hard for the economy to go. It would be hard for it to work, because people would not want to buy property if they're saying, well, I really like this spot here in Morris Plains. I think I could really make a great business of it, but I'm not sure if I could get approved because someone doesn't like me, right? Right. There has to be standards, and that's a lot of what the New Jersey municipal land use is all about. It's standards. The council plays a big role in that, because the council sets the ordinances in conjunction with the planning board, and then the zoning gets rolled out, and certain things get permitted in certain areas. And I think we've all driven around the country in different places, and you're like, wow, how is that use right next to that house, right? Like, it's just kind of, sometimes you're like, what's going on with this? Yeah. And there's usually a strategy behind it. Sometimes you'd like to try to keep your industrial type businesses in a certain area. You want to have your commercial businesses where people are going to walk in and park in a different area. You're going to have your residential in another area. You want to maybe keep some apartments in a different area. So there's always kind of some planning behind it. But it is judicial in nature. And by the time an applicant becomes has their application in front of the planning board, it's kind of the planning board is looking at it and saying, does this meet the definition of what our ordinances say? And we've got great professionals, or we've had great professionals in Morris Plains, both the town engineer and a planning board, professional planner, two different organizations, two different businesses, and they help advise the people on the planning board. And when we were on the board, when I was on the board, we talked through a lot of different applications. And really, what you have to do is look at it and say, well, is it an approved use? And then you want to kind of make sure that whatever's going on meets the master plan and meets the vision of the town. And the master plan gets built, with some feedback from residents as well. So, it's not whether do we like the people who are presenting, do we like the paper they submitted it on, do we like what business it is per se? Is it a McDonald's versus a Shake Shack? You're not getting into those levels. It's a fast food restaurant, or it's a restaurant that features takeout, or it's a restaurant that has a takeout window or features a drive-through. It's that. It's not about the name brand and things like that. So it's very interesting.
And that's part of that, I guess, approved use. Like you were saying, it's not whether it's a McDonald's or a Shake Shack or a bank. It's what can fit the space that has been pre-zoned or planned for. How long were you on the planning board for, John?
About 5 years.
Okay, is that a typical appointment for the boards in Morris Plains?
It varies. It depends on people's schedules. So there have been people who have been on for less. Some have been on it for a very long time, and it depends on just people's schedule and what they're doing in their life. Because sometimes outside activities come in. You got to make the meetings. I think I made almost every meeting when I was on the planning board, because you just felt like, hey, if I'm not there, that's one less person. And now, if someone else has a problem that day and you don't have enough people, now you're delaying things. Now all of a sudden, you've got an applicant who's all ready with their application, who's put a lot of time and work into it, a lot of money, and we're like, oh, we can't hear it because we don't have enough people. So the commitment's important for anybody who's on that planning board, to make sure they're there and make sure they do some homework beforehand, so they walk into the meeting and they know what they're talking about when the discussion starts.
So yeah, it's good info. So how does somebody get on the planning board? How is that? Is that an elected position, or is it appointed? How does that work?
The planning board is an appointed position. The mayor sits on it, and there will always be one council person. So I believe right now it's Kathy Kelly. Prior to when I was on it was Dennis Wagner. Okay. So there's always one council person, and this is sketched out with New Jersey municipal land use law. Like it basically says, here's who can be on your planning board, and they define these people in terms of classes. So the mayor is one thing, one class, the council person's another, and then you could have at-large public people, and that makes up the rest of the planning board. And then there's the professionals who aren't voting; they're not part of the planning board, but they are advising the planning board of technical questions and responses.
So somebody who gets appointed to the planning board by the mayor, right? Is that you mentioned there are different classes. So do they need to have a certain profession or job in town, or can it be, Joe Smith that, is a teacher at school?
Yeah,
and
it could be anybody. It could be anybody. And historically, what you try to do is, you try to have people with some relevant experience, either business experience, some development experience, but it could be anybody. And then each person, I forget if they're 2-year terms or 3-year terms. And you stay on it, and then you're up for renewal on it, unless you retire off or are asked to leave.
And the renewal process, is that voted on by the current members of the planning board to renew? Is it
council?
Council. Okay.
Renewed. Council. Mayor appoints and the council approves.
So is that for for the zoning, for the planning,
board of adjustment, planning board,
nominated by the mayor and then voted on by the council?
Correct.
Okay. So in order for anyone to be on these committees, you do need the mayor to appoint you and then to be approved by the council. Okay, interesting. So for those out there that didn't know that before, that is the process for potentially getting on one of these committees. When I was out canvassing a couple weeks ago, I had a woman say, hey, I'd be interested in being on the planning board. How does that work? And I said, oh, that's a great question. I said, step one is saying you're interested. I said, and then step two, to bring it to a council member or somebody, and to let the mayor know, and the more they know, then you hopefully would be considered next time an open seat comes up for one of those.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So people have asked that type of question a lot, like, how do I get involved? And not many people know, but the website was redesigned a few years ago. And one of the links on the website is a spot to volunteer where you can actually go in, volunteer, put your relevant experience, put the part you're interested in. And I am told that does get pulled and looked at, but essentially people need to know you're interested, right? Mm-hmm. So either the mayor or council, you approach people, and a good way to do it is to tell them, maybe send them an email, send them a resume or some kind of professional documents to show what your experience is, if you have some real valid experience, but just to, make it serious and make it formal. So it's not like you just walked up at the farmer's market and said, hey, I might be interested in this, because people are like, yeah, you might be. So, maybe you're not. But if somebody out there today is listening and they really want to get involved with local government, I would encourage them to fill out that volunteer form and then reach out to the mayor or one of the council members and let them know that.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the website, and that's one of the things that I think Tyler and I want to work on a little bit here, is making it a little bit easier for people to find things, a little bit more transparency in how things are done, but especially when people want to get involved in town, right? There are a lot of things that happen around town. A lot of times, Tyler and I would get questions, especially as we're walking around. People saying, "Well, geez, this went up, the warehouses went up, this is going in. I didn't know anything about that," right? And a lot of that is these things take time. They go through a process, right? They're not just voted on overnight. They go through the planning board or the zoning board to do these things. But people need to know about them, right? And so that's what one of the main things that we're running on is to be able to make that more transparent to the people that are out there, so they understand how these things are working.
So I mean, comment on that. I think it's a double-edged sword sometimes, right? And having sat on the planning board and having been in town for 20 years before I was on the planning board, I kind of see it on both sides of the fences, right? So I was on the planning board, and then you get people who say, well, how is this happening? And I'm like, well, let's see. I know it's been out there. When applications come in and there are notification requirements where if something's happening within certain feet of a resident's home, mailers are required to go out. So those things happen. Those steps happen. So there are notifications. Things are published. Agendas are out there. The meeting is the third Monday of every month for the planning board, and I believe the Board of Adjustment is the fourth meeting. So these meetings are every month at the same time. So people can plan on it. That said, I know it's a little hard, right? I know it's hard. There are people who work in the city. When I was working, when I had my days in the city, I'm getting home 6:30, 7 o'clock. I didn't really have time to turn around and get to a meeting at 7:30, especially if it's going to be a crowded meeting and there might be not as many seats there. You want to get there a little early, whatever. So it was a little hard. I get that. So that's hard. But there is a process out there where it's available to people and accessible. What I would love to see, you talk about accessibility, like there should be more streaming of meetings. These meetings, whether they're live streamed or put on YouTube, like I know, Bill, you're doing that. You're doing a great service for the town. Yes. That needs to happen for people. People need to see it. Not everyone can be there for that time for whatever reason. I think of all the young people in town with young kids. That's kind of hard to get there sometimes. And the fact that you can't get there doesn't mean you don't care, right? You've got things going on, and some of this stuff is hard to follow. And for even like when we did, when we passed some zoning last year, people have had to come to a few meetings to really understand what was going on there. It's not like you can just show up and understand. So I think it's hard, and I think having these meetings streamed so that people could look at them makes sense. I know many other towns do it. I know the town of Morristown does it. Morris Township does stream meetings. People say, well, we're small. Well, we're small, but you know what? There's technology. And I think there are technological solutions out there. I know during COVID, we streamed those meetings. It was not the easiest. And keep in mind, when we were doing that during COVID, we were actually, having people talk and communicate through our systems, which is hard. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be just streamed where you don't have to have the meeting set up so people are participating from home, because that can be a problem, to be honest. If you're in the room and you're getting questions remotely, that can be an issue. But at the very least, meetings should be streamed and available to people to see. It's a participatory project. There's nothing to hide. It's very transparent. It's judicial proceeding, and I think people would benefit from seeing it more often.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that putting it out even one way, right, as you're saying, streaming it out is beneficial, right? It should come from the town doing it, right, not a private citizen. And the technology, the capabilities. I mean, I've spent my entire 20+ year career in technology doing exactly this type of thing. To be honest with you, doing Zoom meetings, doing team meetings, doing Google Meet meetings, whatever it is, really isn't all that difficult, right? It's just a matter of training the people on how to do it, through an easy training. And nowadays, especially because of COVID, most people know how to do these things, right?
Yeah.
So
I think too, one other thing to pick up on, I had a resident approach me a couple of years ago with the question, why can't our agendas be a little bit more clear about what's on the agenda that night, so that maybe it can make it a little more easy for me to understand if I should be there or not. And the person in question brought up an example from Morris Township. And I went online, I looked at it, and there were a few things up for discussion. And it was the agenda, and within the agenda, it was some very technical jargon. You're talking about lot numbers and ordinances and different things. It was PB whatever, application numbers, a lot of jargon. Right below it was, in parentheses, a summary of what was going on. It was one line, and really what it was is that you read the whole app, you read the headline, what it was about, and underneath it was in parentheses, Del Barton School is asking to put up a new sign.
The Cliff Notes.
Check the box. So people are like, you know what? Hey, I live around the corner from Del Barton. I'm very interested in that because I don't want to have a neon sign, right? Versus a person down the street's like, oh, it's just whatever. I trust the planning board in the town. I'm sure they're going to do a great job. And there were a few other things like that.
Yeah.
Where I think to me, it's not a big heavy lift. It's not a big deal, and it's just explaining to people and showing some compassion for the people who are trying to read this, to be engaged, to say, hey, this is what it's all about. And it just makes it easier for people to engage. That's all.
Yeah, it's putting it in common English, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the difference is by doing something like that, it could have one person on one street might be interested in going where 3 blocks away, it doesn't affect them. But how would they know if they don't see that? And if, I'm in real estate, and even if I looked at that, it was like lot this and block that, like it's confusing. So to have that sort of general breakdown under it, one sentence of this is what it's about. Yeah. Hey, the Chick-fil-A wants to expand. Boom. The Del Barton wants a sign. They want to add something.
Yeah, I think the Chick-fil-A was another good one, right? Because I there was something about Chick-fil-A
that came up recently, right?
And the Board of Adjustment, and everyone had bumped into. They're like, what is that all about? I'm like, I don't know. They're doing something, right? And it took somebody in the know to be like, well, the long queue there, they're just making it a little better for their drive. It could have been so much easier just to say, Chick-fil-A is applying to expand their drive-through process, whatever it's called.
Well, and to that end, right? So I went to that Board of Adjustment meeting, which is the zoning board in town. I did go there, and Chick-fil-A was on the menu, and I asked the very simple question, right? What is this for? And the answer I got was very plain and simple, right? This is just to expand the drive-through, right, that they already have. So again, John, to your point, right, it would have been great if that could have been put, in the head of the agenda, right, so people understood what it was about, rather than making people show up and wonder what it's about. Actually, to that end, right, for the McDonald's, I first found out about it when I went on the town's website, which I frequently do. I saw what was on the agenda. I had to look up the block and lot number, right, to figure out what it was.
What block
right?
and lot
So it is the friendliest, but it's also the lot next to it.
Lot next to it, which a lot of people don't realize is that right.
They want to expand, which basically puts it right next to Dunkin' Donuts.
Correct.
But then I went ahead and put it out there in plain English with a map that highlighted where all this stuff is to say, hey, this is where it's proposed going. Which again, a private citizen like myself who's in the know about this stuff, it's great that I'm doing this, but it really should be coming from the council. And I think that's, again, what Tyler, you and I are wanting to do when we get there is just, again, bring the the knowledge to the people, so they understand it in plain English.
I was just going to say, and it might be you and I jumping on some of those, initiatives, or not initiatives, but agendas before they going out and giving a super quick breakdown. If if you're interested in coming to this meeting, this is, the main discussion that's going to happen, a little bit more plain English, because then again, it gives people the option to come. And if they can't come, ideally, we find a way to get everything streamed so they can watch it when they can come home, or they can watch it later that week, because that is a great way to keep people engaged and involved when they, like John said, my daughters have sports and therapies every week. So even for myself, I wouldn't be able to get to all of them. But if I knew I could stream it later, have a way to see it, that would be a very valuable in order to, find out what's going on in the city.
Yeah.
Or in the
we know
town.
people are streaming, right? We see how many views are on Bill's YouTube channel on different things. So people are doing this. Cara Parmigiani streamed the reorganization 2 years ago, and there were over 300 views on that, if I recall at the time. And that room was packed that night too, right? So people, I think people do care. I think you want to meet people where they are. And are they going to be there every week filling up the hall? No. But I think people will pay attention when it's out there. And when you put things out there, people will use it. So I think the other thing is important to connect the dots on this stuff. The planning board, we went through how that's selected, right? But ultimately, a lot of this stuff comes back to the council, right? So the council makes ordinances, passes things, and then the planning board adopts them and puts them into play. So, it's important to understand that. Now, as much as the mayor and council approve people on the planning board, there has to be some separation there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine, let's just take a use that comes into town that's not popular for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. Just imagine anything that comes to town is not popular. We're not going to name names. People come to the meeting, residents, they get all mad, it gets voted down. Right. And if the people on the planning board voted it down because they think everyone in the audience is mad, or everyone in town is mad about it. Meanwhile, it was a permitted use. If the planning board can't figure out like a valid reason to deny it, they're going to get sued. Planning board will get sued, and the applicant will win, and they'll come in, and meanwhile the town will get sued. So you have to be careful about this stuff.
Yeah.
As a result, there's a separation between the council and the planning board. So you don't see council people coming to the planning board meetings. It's not appropriate, right? Because the applicant could say, well, we knew the town council didn't want this because their citizens were all mad, and that town council came to the meeting and they swayed the people against it. So the council has to be careful. So you don't see council people at the planning board meeting or the zoning meeting. That should not be interpreted by residents or anybody that, they don't care, right? They're not allowed to.
Right,
They're not allowed to. Technically, I guess they could be in the room, but it's not encouraged.
Right.
They also can't come out in favor of things during an application period, right? There's a rumor going around right now. There's a certain application in town, and I think there's a rumor floating around about certain council members are for or against it. It's flat out not true. They can't do that. They would be prejudicing the case. The town could get sued. So from any of the council that's not in that planning board meeting, no one is rendering an opinion on this. Right. They're not putting it out there. They may have a personal opinion that they're keeping to themselves. They're not out there putting it out on Facebook or broadcasting it. So, people need to be aware of that a little bit. And it's sort of understanding how these boards work.
Yeah. Other than, of course, right, there, as you mentioned earlier, right, there is a council person that is assigned to the planning board, right? There is one representative from the council on every board that's around. And my understanding is that the point of that is they are supposed to report back to the rest of the council about what was discussed, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. So, but to your point, John, it's not that the council members don't care or don't want to know or don't have an opinion about it. It's that we have to have that separation in the different forms of government, right? Just like we do nationally, right? It's important to maintain that, to maintain continuity of government, so that the people on the council can be a voice for the people and really understand and represent how they feel and not be influenced or be perceived to influence, is what I should say, the application in any way, shape, or form. So,
I think it's yeah, it's important for people to understand that a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of room for improving an application, and that's what the planning board will try to do. Maybe the applicant comes in and we're going to do things in a manner that says A, B, and C, and the planning board listens to the professionals and the planner professional and say, I know you come in here, you want to try to do it in A, B, C. We've seen it done DEF. And we think that, it would be more fitting of Morris Plains and more fit our master plan and what our community is all about if you went DEF instead of A, B, and C. You okay with that? And an applicant will say, sure, we'll do that. And then conversely, they might be like, we know your requirement is X and we want Y. For instance, City MD came in when I was on the planning board. And we have a very strict sign requirement. And City MD is like, look, we're a franchise. We do it this way. We have standardized buildings. We understand that you have a sign ordinance and ours proposed is in violation. Would you let us do it? Would you grant us a waiver? And we'll negotiate. And the planning board will negotiate. I said, all right, well, how about if you do it this way and that way and maybe, and ultimately they've got a sign that is more of a compromise where it fits their building, it fits their brand, and it's not 100% within the Morris Plains sign ordinance, but it's fitting for that property. So those are some conditions you put on it, and you kind of work with people. So you kind of sculpt it out, and you get to a good place, because ultimately everyone wants to be in a good place, right? The applicant wants to do their part. They want to be a good citizen in town, a good resident in town. The residents want to see certain things. The planning people want to feel like they did a nice job and really interpreted the law and our master plan correctly. And people are looking generally for a win-win around it.
Right. And look, I think overall, right, when you look at the planning board, the zoning board, and the council, I think the concept is that Morris Plains needs to grow, but in the right direction, right? I think that things defining what types of businesses can come into town, right, is important, because it allows for the businesses that we want here that will grow our town in the right direction. And not that it'll keep the other ones out, but it'll provide guidance to what can and maybe shouldn't come in here based on really what we feel is important in Morris Plains.
Well,
so
I think this is where I'm excited about the candidacy, both of you running and campaigning. You bring you both have a very big stake in this town with young kids. You have a lot of energy. You've got insights. Tyler, your experience as a real estate professional throughout northern New Jersey, you understand what makes a town, really viable and what people want in a town. Good schools, affordable taxes, an engaged community, a vibrant downtown, things as big or small as sidewalks. Sidewalks connect people, right? So there's things like that. And I think that's where it's important for people with different views to be able to weigh in on things and different perspectives. I was at Autodidact on Friday, sampling their last of the Dream House, their summer IPA.
Nice.
They just do such a great job up there. That was not a permitted use.
Yeah.
It was not a permitted use. People had to fight to get that as a permitted use. So it takes different perspectives, as time goes by. 25 years ago, when we were new to town, if you were like, oh, there's going to be a microbrewery, like, what? Really? Like, I thought those were only in Vermont or New York State. So it takes people with some different perspective to help us move forward. We're going to be celebrating Morris Plains' 100th anniversary next year, right?
Right. And
it's great to look back and celebrate all the great things that this town has accomplished, and it is. And then it's like, okay, how are we pivoting to move forward? Things are changing so fast, right? I read this book, The Book of Charlie. The man lived to be 109 years old. And they were talking about the person who was interviewing him when he was a teenager. When he was a teenager with no skills, no formal training, someone just taught him how to do this on, like, oh, we need this. There's this huge push. What was it? It was converting homes from gas lighting to electric lighting, right? You imagine you're in your kitchen, like your kitchen was lit by a gas fixture. And you have this 17-year-old kid coming in, and he's converting you from gas to electric, right? I'm sure there was some pushback in that day where people did not want to give up their gas light.
Yeah.
Right. And we see that all around us today. The world's going to be so different. So you want to kind of honor and keep what's great and traditions and have history, but you also want to move forward, I think, and you got to balance that. And I think that's where it's important for people to have a good perspective, to push things forward, to reflect what residents want in town.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, John, I appreciate you coming by today. Thanks for chatting with us. I think it was very educational, very informative, right? I hope people learn as much as Tyler and I did about the planning board process and how these boards work in town, how they're appointed, and as we said before, right? Tyler and I are really here for Morris Plains, right? We really want to move these things forward, right? But the right things as we go through this process, right? It's a journey, and we're on it.
And we want to keep everyone involved. We want people to know what we're doing and how we're doing it. We welcome everyone's thoughts. We're here to listen, and I kind of say we don't have a voice without yours. So what's important to you is important to us. And again, John's been a great source of knowledge and insight for us. So yeah, John, thank you for coming by. It's great to have great to have you in town, knowing that you're passionate and you care, and you've given your time through things like the planning board, and you're always a welcome guest and friend on our show here. And again, we just want to say thank you so much for coming by.
I'm glad it was time well spent. And I would just tell the listeners out there that if you have questions, just ask your council people. Feel free to ask me. I'm not an expert, but I can give you some of my experience. Ask Bill and Tyler. Ask people who are involved in town, and get involved. And yes, the meetings are not taped right now. You have Bill streaming. Watch them where you can. Attend in person as much as possible while you can, and ask the questions. Why aren't they streamed? Why is this use permitted in town? Just ask the questions, because ultimately what's going on in town, the government can't control, the council can't control exactly what business comes into town, but they can set ordinances and zoning that helps encourage it, right? So if you're seeing something, ask those questions. How did we get here? What can we do to more reflect what I think the residents want? And ask those questions and be part of the solution, because it takes everyone.
Yeah, it sure does. So thanks again, John. Really appreciate your time today.
Well said.
And we'll talk to everybody next time.
Sounds great.
Good luck, guys.